Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett along with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And this is a subject matter we've dealt with a few times, but never really often enough because it's something that we really need to draw attention to.
Yes, today we're really pleased to welcome here in a few minutes Jim Hmurovich, who is the CEO of Prevent Child Abuse America, who is in Oklahoma City giving a talk and meeting with some folks about the Oklahoma organization with the same name. And we were able to lasso him and bring him on our show to talk about a topic, as you point out, we've talked about a number of times, prevention of child abuse, still actively involved in it in a number of ways, and it's still a very important topic for all of us to hear about. We're really tickled that we can get somebody in who spends his professional life dealing with it and has for a number of years, knows a lot more about it and can give us some really good insight.
Jim Hmurovich, our guest today on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
I've been fortunate enough to premiere every film that I've produced at Sundance. Seeing your film on the big screen for the first time in front of an audience at the Sundance Film Festival is unmatched. I'm Chad Burris. I'm an attorney, a film producer, film financier, economic development financier, and I'm Chickasaw. Nobody can argue that modern day media, cinema, has perpetuated this myth, this idea of the Indian and what that is. And just the idea that, all Indians look one way or all Indians act one way is a terrible injustice. Being able to have filmmakers tell stories that are representative of some element of his surroundings, his upbringing, what they know, what they see through their own eyes, that other people get a chance to bear witness to around the world. I think that's amazing. For me personally, being an Indian today means being responsible, honest, progressive, and giving that back to the community.
Learn more about today's Chickasaws at profilesofenation.com.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Today, as I indicated in our opening session, we are really pleased and honored to welcome to the set of The Verdict Jim Hmurovich from Indiana. Jim is the CEO of Prevent Child Abuse America. He's been in that position for approximately 9 years. Prior to that time, Jim did his undergraduate work at Indiana University and his master's degree work at Indiana University. He started out his professional career in the penal system, and not as an inmate, but as an administrator in the penal system in Indiana. He then got into child welfare and was head of Indiana's child welfare division, or the welfare division, for 9 years prior to him going to Child Abuse America. We're really pleased that we could get Jim to come visit with us today because he's in town simply to give a talk to a group of people and to meet, and we were able to capture him for just a few minutes. So Jim, welcome to Oklahoma and thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
It is good to have you in Oklahoma City. What will your message be when you're here and visiting with people?
It's a pretty simple message. Prevention is possible. It takes all of us to make sure children can grow up to be healthy and transition into adulthood as good contributing members of society, and that we know what needs to be done. We just have to have the public and political will to do it.
How do we know, just from prior experience of things that haven't been done very well?
A little bit of that, to be quite honest, but it's also, there's a lot of research that talks about when children are abused and why they're abused or why they're neglected. And there's answers to them, and there's evidence and research to support programs and treatment modalities and whatnot. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources to accomplish it, But I really want to make the point that it's not government's responsibility alone to take care of children. You know, parents have the ultimate responsibility, in my opinion, but a lot of parents simply need some support, need some help, need some information. Parenting is a tough job, and sometimes children are born and parents just need answers. Hopefully, Prevent Child Abuse America and our chapter here in Oklahoma provide those answers.
Isn't part of the problem that almost every situation almost requires careful consideration? You know, it's not something that government can come in with one policy, one blanket issue, and it's going to address every situation in every family. So it's something that's so individual and specific. What kind of problems does that create for an administrator?
You know, you've actually focused in on the real issue. You're exactly right.
He's awfully good about doing that, by the way.
I don't want to say I'm surprised, but I'm very pleased to hear that. No, you're exactly right. The lesson I learned when I took over the child welfare system in Indiana was that a caseworker told me, they said, Jim, you're going to see a situation in which two children were in the same home, and you're going to be willing to make us recommend the same solution to both children. Don't. You're making a mistake. Every child is different. Every family is different. We need different responses to it. You're exactly right.
Well, how is today's best strategies? Is it more intervention from the state level, or is it less intervention at the state level? I mean, do you continue to work with the family, trying to get things straightened out? Are you more likely to just say, look, the state needs to take control of this situation?
Well, I'll tell you, unfortunately, the state sometimes does need to take control of the situation, and we ought to be thankful we have child welfare workers, child protective service workers, and law enforcement who do that. Prevent Child Abuse America believes because prevention is possible, it's our mission to prevent the abuse from ever occurring in the first place. And in order to do that, I think it needs two things. We need a policy framework that emanates at the federal level, to be quite honest, that talks about that multidisciplinary, interagency type of support, information giving, so that there's a strategy to help prevent abuse from ever occurring in the first place. But the second part is a public reaction, a culture in the United States that says every child basically is our child. If we believe that the future of America rests upon children, well, then we ought to have a stewardship role for all children and not just say, you know, government needs to intervene at the wrong time. We need to prevent it from ever happening.
Let's take a step back and focus on your organization, Prevent Child Abuse America. How did it get started? Who started it? What is its mission? And just tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. The organization was founded by Donna Stone, who was a Kappa Delta in college, who has become a very good supporter of ours over the 30, 40 years. She said, she was a Chicago socialite, to be quite honest, and she said, I need to do something for children, and what is it? And she did her homework, and she found out back then in the early 70s, child abuse wasn't even recognized as a real issue in America. If my history bears well, children were, excuse me, abusers were sometimes prosecuted under animal protection laws. And it was only in like 1964, 65 that the battered child syndrome came out and made it an issue. She took this on as our issue. She founded it in Chicago. It's been in Chicago ever since. And it's easy what our mission is. Our mission is our name, and our name is our mission.
Mental illness obviously plays a role in this, both at the child and the parenting. Substance abuse at the parenting level can play a role in this. But I'm interested in what percentage of those cases does the state need to get involved, or is it more of a case of an abusive parent is relying on what their life experiences? In other words, you know, you're relying on the parenting you received when you start trying to deliver it back out as an adult. Right. So which of those three scenarios is the one that interests you most?
You do ask good questions. I'm not sure I can answer that quantitatively. I do know that with one of our programs, which is called Healthy Families America, it's a home visitation program. About 90% of the families who nationally who are involved in that have one of what we call the big three: mental health, substance abuse, or domestic violence in the family. So in those instances, I do know. Now, those families haven't even been reported to Child Protective Services at that point. When we take a look across the country, we see that children who have been abused or neglected, there is often, and I don't know what often means, but often, a significant often amount of time that one of the big three plays a role into it. And that, unfortunately, as we can imagine, has an impact on children. And children who are abused or neglected, they really have a rough road in life. It can be overcome. But children who are abused or are neglected have a higher risk of mental illness themselves, chronic health problems, substance abuse problems, being bullied or being a bully, an academic success or failure, and even there's a higher risk of juvenile delinquency and criminogenic behavior. So it is intergenerational for sometimes, and sometimes what we need to do is take a look at our society, our culture, and what do we value and where do we put our resources. And that's where the public will comes in.
What kind of outreach does your organization engage in around the country?
Well, we're very fortunate because we do have 50 chapters throughout the country, and most of our outreach occurs, for example, in Oklahoma with our Prevent Child Abuse Oklahoma chapter. Throughout the country, we have over 350 different strategies in order to reach the public, whether it be home visitation, whether it be bullying prevention, child sexual abuse prevention, a myriad of different things. When it comes to services, some of our chapters actually provide services, others make referrals. It's a community issue, and we like the idea of getting communities engaged and involved because that's where the real answer is. Again, government has an important role to play, but it can't be the only player in the game. It's got to be all of us.
So tell me about the national organization. You're in Chicago, where the headquarters are. Are you in any way funding any of the other 50, or are you providing other types of support? What's the relationship between you and the 50 entities that comprise your organization?
We do not provide as much funding as we would like. Every chapter is their individual 501c3, or they are part of state government in some instances, about 10 or 12 different states. We provide a lot of technical assistance. We provide the federal advocacy role of working with the members of Congress and the members of the president or the administration. We also provide the opportunity to hook into some of our national sponsors and that have a relationship at the local level. So we, if I could name names, Verizon Wireless has been very good in that regard. Kohl's has wonderful volunteer programs that we coordinate. There's a lot of good companies who experience corporate responsibility.
Yeah. Jim Hmurovich is our guest. He's with Prevent Child Abuse America. We'll have more with Jim after this.
It's a North American energy revolution. We're the fastest growing source of new oil and natural gas supplies in the world.
The shift to North American energy will create approximately 3 million jobs.
All that money we've been sending overseas, $400 billion a year. Imagine that staying in our economy. It's a game changer.
Real energy independence starts now, and it starts with Oklahoma.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Jim Hmurovich is our guest today on The Verdict. We're talking about child abuse and how to prevent child abuse. Jim, what are the failures inside of a community that allows or encourages child abuse to take place indirectly?
Sure. You know, one statistic that has always amazed me is that market research indicates that over 90%, which is 9 out of 10 Americans, believe child abuse is a serious issue. But sometimes when you take that down to a local level, that's where I'm going to say we see the gaps occur. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we have to take the approach that every child is in fact important to us, regardless of where they live, who they are, in socioeconomic class, cultural class, whatever the case may be. And when a community doesn't recognize that we all have a responsibility to children, I think that's where the real problem rests. Sometimes we all get so busy, we forget that our next door neighbors might be going through economic stress. Maybe it would be helpful for somebody to go over and say, why don't you and the wife go out for a while, have a good time, and we'll watch the kids. Sometimes we forget that donating on Sunday, you know, is good, but volunteerism through a ministry is just as good too. I think what we have to do is take the time to really care about happy children and children who can have healthy childhoods, who grow up to be good contributing members. I think that's where the real breakdown is. We don't look at it as our responsibility. We see it as only a parent's responsibility or a government responsibility. We all have a stake in this. I believe that's my observation.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your organization again. How does Prevent Child Abuse America, the national organization headquartered in Chicago, reach out to state organizations such as the one that we have here in Oklahoma about Prevent Child Abuse Oklahoma, and get them to engage in programs, get them stimulated to take action to prevent child abuse? What does your national organization do to invigorate the local organizations?
Well, I think I could break it down into 3 or 4 major components. First of all, believe it or not, communicating and messaging about prevention is very difficult. When people hear I'm from Prevent Child Abuse America, they said, oh, I read about that child who was just abused. Well, actually, no. We're the people who hope that never gets in the newspaper. Sure. So I think we provide a lot of information about how to message correctly. And I think that's one of the more important things we do. The second thing is, I've had some very great meetings with your state legislative leadership over the last couple days. Very well-intentioned people, honorable people who listened and, you know, took advice, so to speak, and they're serious people about wanting to make the state of Oklahoma a better place to live. So meeting and advocating legislatively is important. And then the third thing, I think, is to help with what I'm going to call technical assistance. Through the graciousness of our sorority funders, we've been able to create child sexual abuse technical service centers and anti-bullying prevention technical service centers, which helps our local chapters become better leaders in their community to do what is best for their community. Every chapter is their 501c3, and we like that because it means people locally are making decisions that are good for the local community.
How is Child Abuse Oklahoma structured? Where is it located, and how is it organized?
It's our chapter is within Parent Promise, and it has its own board of directors, and it also provides home visitation services. And they're led by a wonderful person named Billy Brown, and we have a wonderful working relationship with them. And it was through their good connections locally, the relationships they built, that I got invited to Oklahoma City. So I'm very grateful.
So are we.
How do we measure success? How do we know if we're doing better?
You know, that's the $64,000 question for those in your audience who are my age. They remember that show. But I tend to look at...
I remember when it was $64, but let's don't get back into that. Please go ahead.
There you go. That's a tough one because I'll give an example. When I was state welfare director, one of our particular counties in Indiana had a child abuse rate, number of child abuse referrals. And there was a change of leadership there, and all of a sudden it skyrocketed. And I said, why all of a sudden? And the answer was, we now believe that the Child Protective Service System in our county is really going to do their job. So it taught me a lesson to be careful about how I measure. And so to your question precisely, we're looking at how do you measure the well-being of children? Because I think if we go along the line of child abuse is decreasing, there are so many methodological problems with that we may not get the right answer. So if we can say children are immunized, children are going to grade school, ready to learn, children have parents who are not substance abusers or whatnot, I think that's the better chance that we have of really measuring the issue.
How do grandparents fit into this equation?
You hit a string in my heart. Grandparents have taken on a parental responsibility role big time over the last, decade. One of our partners is General Federation of Women's Club, and we partner with them to get messages from our national office, our chapter network, to the local clubs, which I think there's over 400 of them throughout the country. And parenting tips, how to be a grandparent when you're asked to do so, how to be a grandparent when everything's in shape. Grandparents play a very critical role in the lives of children in this country right now.
What does your organization tell or suggest or advise? I don't mean you tell anybody anything, but what do you advise the state organizations like Oklahoma's Department of Human Services or other regulators about things they ought to be doing to prevent rather than having to deal with it after it's already occurred? How can we prevent it from happening in the first instance? What do you tell them?
Two things. Number one, you've already listed the first one, and that is when a situation occurs that the media catches attention to, I always encourage legislators, policymakers to say, I'm going to ask the people involved, what could have been done to prevent that horrible child fatality, horrible abuse case from ever happening? And then once I get those answers, what I would recommend is that you develop a state plan, an interdisciplinary, agency state plan. And Oklahoma, by the way, has a pretty darn good state plan for the prevention of abuse and neglect. So then the third issue becomes, how is it going to be implemented? Who's going to govern the implementation? And will there be resources to do it?
Tell us about the program you're working on as outlined in the website.
Connect the Dots is the movement, and the website is whatsyourdot.org. And it's an initiative that basically captures what I've been trying to say maybe weekly, and that is that everyone has a role to play in children's life. And we literally ask you, what's your dot? And let's connect those dots. And so somebody with a teaching background might say, I'm an educator, and the way that I help to bring healthy children around is by giving them the right educational information and whatnot. What we want to do is show it is everyone's responsibility to make sure children have happy childhoods and transition into a contributing member.
Everyone's a dot, whether they know it or not.
Well, now that's pretty good. I may steal that.
You can take it.
Thank you very much.
We're running out of time, but urban or rural, where's the growth area in child abuse?
Whoa, that's a good question. I would, without having the data in front of me, I would say there's a lot of issues everywhere, but I'd probably give the nudge, unfortunately, to urban.
All right. Jim Hmurovich is our guest today on The Verdict. Jim, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for coming to Oklahoma.
Yes, sir.
Kent and I will have a final word after this.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I think for us, once we got started and we began to see the tremendous need just within our state, it really was just a calling for us. The blessings far outweigh any obstacles that we've faced.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
We are back on the set of The Verdict, wrapping up the show with Jim Hmurovich of Prevent Child Abuse America. Really interesting show, and I think the distinction you made in our commercial break is that Jim's organization is trying to prevent child abuse, not try to deal with it after it's already taken place, and that's usually where people view DHS as coming in with a role.
Yes, DHS does have a prevention role, but it also has a correction role. It has a role of what can be done once it has occurred. How can we make sure it doesn't occur again, and how can we make an intelligent determination about whether the child ought to go home after the incident has occurred or ought to be placed in custody, in protective custody.
Yeah.
Jim's organization is ahead of the game. It's you can sure ease a lot of those after abuse activities to a minimum if you prevent it in the first place. And that's their mission. That's what they're trying to do. And while, as I say, while Oklahoma's DHS and other states' comparable organizations have a prevention role, they also have the very, very tough job of dealing with it after it's already occurred. And as a result, their prevention activities are probably not as vigorous as they would be if they joined with Jim's organization.
A mental illness aspect to this issue. There's certainly a substance abuse angle to this issue. But it gets right down to some of the high-profile cases we see. You know, generally, a parent is going to exhibit the parenting skills they saw when they were a child, subconsciously or consciously. And sometimes that's hard to deal with, you know, inside of different cultures. So anyway, I appreciate Jim's work, and no question we're going to come back and deal with this one again. Jim has a website. I'm sure he'd love for you to visit and give him some feedback. It's called preventchildabuse.org. That's preventchildabuse.org. And we have a website. We'd love for you to visit. Tell us about a guest you'd like to see or a subject matter you'd like to see us discussed. It's theverdict.tv. That's theverdict.tv. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.
Bert is the first name of the other guy, the musician.